Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session about compliance benchmark and how we migrated from the good old Jamf Compliance Editor to it. My name is Martin. If you can't quite place my accent, it's because I originally grew up in Belgium, but then I migrated to Australia over a decade ago. So now I'm based in Melbourne, and I work at CIS, where I'm a senior system engineer.
Hey everyone, my name's Stu, and unfortunately I don't have a beautiful Belgian accent, but I am also based in Melbourne. So Martin and I are very accustomed to really good coffee, but unexpected weather. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start with what is a security benchmark. We'll then go into Jamf Compliance Editor, our pre-state, and then migrating to compliance benchmarks.
All right. Before we do that, let me give you a bit of context of the environment we're working with. So CIS is a global job marketplace platform that connects job seekers with employment opportunities and help employees find the right candidates. So we're working with about 1,500 Macs and 850 iPhones and iPads, which makes up about 50% of our fleet. So we do operate as a single EUC platform team, which means every decision we make, we try to consider both Mac and Windows and keep the environment very much on par. And we enable our staff with a true choose-your-own-device program.
All right, Martin, so let's dig into it. What exactly is a security benchmark?
So, a security benchmark, it's a standardized set of guidelines, best practice, and configurations recommendations that are designed to help organizations improve their security posture. So it serves as a reference point for assessing and aligning system, processes, and policies to industry-recognized security standards. There's a whole range of them that covers different OSs and different level of security for each one of those OSs.
So the macOS Security Compliance Project is an open source effort to provide a programmatic approach to generating security guidance. The project can be used to output customized documentation, scripts, both for logging and remediation, configuration profiles, and an audit checklist based on the baseline used. And they support a range of baselines, as you can see here.
Back in September last year, our security department asked us to enforce a security benchmark. And that's when we agreed that the CIS Level 1 was probably enough for us because we're not a bank or anything fancy that's highly governed. But we still agreed that we would need to do some tweaking on the CIS Level 1. As Sequoia was about to come out, and those benchmarks get reviewed on a yearly basis when the new OS comes out, we asked security if they were happy for us to wait for macOS 15 to be out and published. They were fine with that. At the time, JNUC 24 just had happened, and compliance benchmarks had been announced, but because we didn't have a release date for it yet, we decided to proceed without it.
So this is where Jamf Compliance Editor comes into action. So there is quite a lot of documentation around Jamf Compliance Editor, so we won't go too deep into it, but we'll start with a little bit of an overview, just to give some context. So basically, Jamf Compliance Editor is an app that helps you build and customize your security baseline. It supports all the OSs and benchmarks. It's got a very simple UI to follow, and it will generate, at the end, a guidance in PDF format that can be shared with the rest of the business. But Martin, let's talk about your implementation.
Let's do it. Basically, in the span of 6 weeks, we went from 0 to 100. So we started by reviewing the CIS Level 1 baselines and agreed on some variants. For example, we are OK to keeping AirDrop on and allowed our users to use that. And also, like, forcing the Bluetooth icon to be in the menu bar, it's not something we actually care about that much, so we were happy to remove that from the benchmark as well. And then using the Jamf Compliance Editor, we then created the benchmark and customized it to our variants. We tested it first in our dev environment, and then we eventually moved to pilot group and to the full production. And again, within 6 weeks, so I think that was a pretty good timeline. And I mean, it's not like we weren't secure before the CIS Level 1 was applied. Like, we always had a good security posture. We just weren't really formalizing it. So because we now are following the CIS Level 1, I mean, I guess realistically, the users didn't really notice a big difference, so it was very seamless for them. We created a whole bunch of configuration profiles, policies, and extension attributes, as well as some smart group for automated remediation. And when you do all that, having good documentation is quite critical. Because those benchmarks, they actually are hundreds of pages, and it can take a while to get your head around it. So what we did is clearly listed every single rule of the benchmark and sorted them in 3 categories: either enforce, tweak, or simply exclude. And that made our life a lot easier later when it was time to migrate to compliance benchmarks, because we could refer to this documentation and again, align everything to it.
Now, Martin, it's fair to say that you're a fairly big fan of Splunk. If I'm not mistaken, you've done a presentation on it at XWorld.
I have, yes. Splunk is a pretty big part of my life as a Mac admin. That's because Seek is a pretty big Splunk customer. And we already have all our logs going into it. So from there, it was reasonably easy to build a nice reporting dashboard to help us track our progress and be able to brag to our colleagues of how good we are at our job. Because if you look, for example, there at the compliance trend, you see that as soon as we turned it on, like we just went straight up and we stayed up there. So it proves that the system is working. And we can also monitor through it. So if we see any drops in there, like maybe something is happening and we need to investigate. It could be a false positive or a false negative, but like, yeah, it's just like you gotta keep an eye on it.
So here is where compliance benchmarks enters. So a new feature that's basically bringing the feature set of Jamf Compliance Editor into that Jamf Pro interface that we know and love. So let's dig into that. So forgive me if you've heard this before, but Jamf Account SSO is the key here. It allows you to use your cloud-based identity provider or a Jamf ID configured in Jamf Account to log into Jamf Pro. And this process is simple and, yeah, necessary to hook up your Jamf Pro or Jamf School environment to our platform services, which drive blueprints and compliance benchmarks.
So as of this week, we now have 5 lovely templates available: CIS and NIST. So because the platform services are microservices, well, we're not tied to the release cycle of Jamf, which is why they can just drop new features and new features just like that outside of the release cycle, which is very handy.
And I have a pro tip for everyone here. If nothing else, my pro tip to give to everyone is when you log into the Jamf Learning Hub, you can subscribe to not only the Jamf Pro release notes, but also there's a separate release cycle for blueprints and for compliance benchmarks. So subscribe to those as well.
Yep.
So now, Martin, do you mind walking us through this process once we have this all hooked up into our Jamf Pro environment?
Of course, that's what we're here for, aren't we? So yeah, let's go ahead and select CIS Level 1. And to start with, we're just going to pick monitoring only, because the goal here is to make sure that we align our policies with the existing one and to make sure we avoid conflicts. So when you go through the assistant, you'll see that the rule selection is quite straightforward, and the beauty of it is that it's mirroring the CIS benchmarks one. So it's very easy to find what you need, and that's when you can refer to your existing documentation to make sure everything matches. For example, talked earlier about the Bluetooth menu bar. Well, if you need to find Bluetooth, you can either search for 2.4, which is the CIS reference, or you could just have used Bluetooth, and you got there either way. Once you find it, you can just untick it because we decided to exclude it in our environment. So some rules also allow customization. So once again, refer to your documentation and make sure it matches your current policy. This is the goal here. We want everything to be aligned. Like for example, if your screensaver lock, your time, you want to change it and not stick with the default CIS, you can decrease it, and that's it. You just make those changes in the UI and keep going. So before you save, you will have a nice little summary of everything that it's about to create. And just a reminder, because here we're only in monitoring mode, no config profiles are going to be created. So yeah, it's confirming that we're on the right path, and this is what's going to happen. So here we go, really. Took about 15 minutes at this stage. Like, you can just go and click through, and because again, you're in monitoring, there's not really many risks taken here. So yeah, here we go. It's there, it's deployed. Everyone's happy.
Job done.
So Stu, let's say we click open now.
Sure. Let's say we click through to open, and we'll see more of the UI here. So the UI will show you a summary of the baseline that you've created. And you'll see 2 key tabs up the top that I'll draw your attention to. We have configuration and rule report. That's where we can see our rules. So let's say we click in. So here we see the rule report showing individual benchmark rules. Unfortunately, because the CIS benchmark doesn't utilize declarative, neither does the reporting. So if you are using blueprints, it might trigger some false positives, e.g. Software updates and password policies. So that's why you will see some failures on this screenshot at this stage, but we'll get to that.
All right, if we head over to policies, you see that a new set of auditing policy has been created under that CIS Level 1 category. And because our naming convention is actually quite similar, you see our old one that we created manually through the compliance editor just above it. Now at this stage, when we did this migration, all our fleet was actually already on Sequoia, which is why we didn't need to separate and scope different OSs. But again, that's coming later when Tahoe comes out. So if we do go back into the reporting tab, we do need to look at those failing and try to understand what's going on there. So for example, this one with the login window custom message, okay, something isn't quite right. Let's dig into it and see what's happening. Well, in this case, it's actually quite straightforward. I went through the assistant too quickly, and it turns out I didn't edit the default message that the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, puts in there. But again, using the UI, you can very easily go and edit that and change it to whatever your company is mandating. And then you save that as a draft. It's clearly going to tell you that, yeah, there's some changes there that need to be pushed out. You deploy it, and within a few minutes, it's all there. It's happening. The report is now green, and everybody's happy.
So, Martin, is there by any chance any other way to monitor the compliance?
I'm so glad you asked, Stu, because yes, there is. Of course there is. It's by using the extension attributes. So again, here you see that we have our two different extension attributes, like the old one from the compliance editor and the new ones from the compliance benchmark. And right now you see that even the old ones are failing. And that's because we actually moved to DDMs and blueprints for software update management. So once again, because the CIS benchmark right now doesn't really support declarative, it's actually failing on those points. So this whole declarative kerfuffle is kind of tricky right now, because the way this works is that we need to be able to run a script locally on the device to report on those settings and to be able to audit them. So I don't know if we've got a great way forward to support declarative at this stage. Maybe the new API that we announced yesterday are going to help with that, but it's probably too soon to tell. So right now, the easiest way to fix this is actually to go and turn back your old config profile back, knowing that the declarative one will supersede them anyway, so you can sort of have best of both worlds. If you want to dig into this a bit further, I would recommend you to listen to the latest episode of the Mac Admin podcast, which is 430, if I'm not mistaken, where they talk about the Mac Security Project version 2. So yeah, feel free to refer to that if you want more details. But so basically now, yeah, I've turned my old profile back on, and you see that my old my old extension attribute has now been fixed. But the new one somehow still not quite there yet. Well, it's again because when I did go through the original setup, I forgot to exclude some of the Apple Intelligence rules that we're happy to leave out there for our users. So I went back through the assistant and removed those from the benchmark, but here in my extension attribute, they're actually still showing up. So let's dig a bit deeper. So these EAs, they're populated by the audit policy. That policy will basically populate a custom P list that is then used to fill in and populate the extension attribute. But the way this works is that first the policy runs on a daily basis. So when you're doing your initial testing, you might need to go and flush that all the time because you want it to run a lot more often while you're doing your alignment and your tweaking there. But even when I flush it, those extension attributes, it still didn't feel quite right. Those rules were still reporting as failed. And that's because when you completely remove or exclude a rule from your benchmark, the audit policy will stop updating that rule with a fail or pass status. But if you remove it from the audit, then basically the audit policy will stop updating that rule completely, And it means that in this case, it won't even remove it either. So the key here is to delete the plist completely, let the audit policy run again so that it can repopulate it, and now we've removed the ones that it stopped updating. So once you do that, you see that now our extension attributes, both old and new ones, they're now lined up. So we're on the right path here. If we go back into the reporting tab, you see that everything has now turned green, so we are good to go. While you are in those reporting, you can actually click on any of those rules, and here you'll see a list of computers which allow you to see each device individually and which one is either failing or passing. So it's very handy if you need to go and actually find out which machine is failing to do some more investigation.
Okay, so Martin, now that we've been doing our monitoring and we've made sure our policies are aligned with the monitoring, is it time to go ahead and turn on the enforcement?
I would say it is.
Let's do it.
So that's it really. You go back in, you switch that button, and it's pretty much that simple. It's going to create a whole bunch of configuration profile and a few new policies. And again, it's really just a few minutes of work. So if we go back into the config profiles, you'll see that here, all of these have now been created under that CIS Level 1 that was automatically created by the benchmark. So they might look a bit complicated, but at the end of the day, they're just custom plists with some XML in there. So you can always dig in and look at what's actually happening in there. Now, it might be useful to keep some of your old configuration profile around. For example, if you need to allow beta releases, or if you need non-admin to be able to do software updates, because that's actually not at all covered by the CIS benchmark. And then if we head back into our policies, you'll see that now on top of our audit ones, we also have some remediation ones. So for each OS, you have one of each, and there, everything is there, and it's been created automatically by compliance benchmarks. Now, just FYI, what's happening there in the back end for the remediation policy is they first run a reset and then a check, fix, check. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's quite all right. I would recommend you to go and look at maybe some documentation on the Jamf Compliance Editor, because that's very much the logic that's happening there. The good thing, though, is because it does perform a reset, that whole spiel I went about to delete the plist like 2 minutes ago, well, once you move into enforcing, you actually don't need to worry about it again, because that reset does exactly that, which is deleting the plist if anything has changed.
All right, so Martin, is that it? Job complete, we never need to look at this again?
I mean, I wish, but unfortunately, no, not quite. From here onwards, all you need to do really is monitor for updates in the benchmarks. So this is what, for example, happened on the Tahoe release day. You go and you see that an update is available. That flag is clearly there. It's quite hard to miss. And then if you do and click through, you'll see that, oh, look, there's a whole bunch of rules that have been modified. And if you look here on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that this is an earlier one that happened maybe around July, telling you that in this case, there was just a completely new rule that was added. So when that happens, you just go, click through, look for those flags, and you decide what you want to do. Like, do you want to enforce location service in the menu bar? That's up to you, tick, untick, and you just decide. It's that easy. So once again, once you do that, some changes, you deploy, and here we go. Everything's out there. We've got the new policy. We're now supporting Tahoe. It really took 5 minutes. It was available on release day. It felt like magic, honestly. There's no other way for it. It's so much easier and so simple that, yeah.
Nice.
That's it.
All right, so look, this is all pretty straightforward, but there are a few things that you should definitely consider as you go down this path. One always wise bit of wisdom is be careful with your FileVault profiles. You do not want to invalidate recovery keys. That's not the kind of week that you want to have. Secondly, anything created by compliance benchmarks is editable, but do proceed with caution if you do edit them, as any manual changes that you might make to a configuration profile, policy, or smart group will be overwritten next time you deploy a change through compliance benchmarks. So do keep that in mind, but it's nice to know that it'll work when you run it again.
Sure does. Now, I don't know about you, but I sometimes have a tendency, like a new feature comes out, I'll try it out, and if it doesn't work, I'll move on, and I'll never revisit it. Well, if you did have a look at Compliance Benchmark when it came out, let me run through a few things that have changed since then, because maybe it is time for you to revisit it if you haven't. The first one is that you can now, as you've seen, you can edit those rules. Like when it actually came out the first time, you couldn't. You were stuck with whatever the benchmark was mandating. You can also now very easily export a PDF, CSV, or Excel to just help with your audit and share with the rest of the company. Like, it's quite funny because we did this presentation at Xworld like a month ago, and that feature did not exist. It literally came out 3 days later. So it's a moving target, and it's quite important to stay on top of it. So that tip about subscribing to the release note would definitely recommend. And of course, as of yesterday or the day before, we now have the NIST benchmark in there, so that's great. Before that, we just had CIS. Here we go. So there's still a few things that are not available in here, and I really wish they were. Like, we've talked about Declarative before, and that's a kind of worms that might take a little while to get sorted. Like, I was hoping that maybe with macOS 26 we would get some sort of DDM support, but no, we're not there yet. So definitely something to keep an eye out. And the release notes, yes, so you can find some release notes on the Jamf Learning Hub, but I'll be honest, there's not enough of them. I want more, because there's so many little things that are changing all the time that are not always documented.
I always want more documentation.
Yeah, documentation, I like it. You know, it's a great nightstand read.
Exactly.
If you want to go to sleep, yeah. Now, there's a few things that are available in the Compliance Editor that are not yet available in Compliance Benchmarks. Well, first is more templates. Yes, we've got those 5. It's great, but as Stu showed you earlier, there's actually a lot more than that. So it would be great to have more templates. There's also no way to exclude any devices and to have a formal exemption process if you need to, for any given reason, have one computer outside of that benchmark. And then really, like, target OS. Like, right now, if you use compliance benchmarks, it's going to create the rules and the config profile for all the last 4 macOSs. We're in a really good position at SIG. We only need to support the last 2. So yeah, it's not a big deal. Those are just going to sit there and not being used. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just bloat in my Jamf, and I'd rather be able to just remove them completely. But if you remove them, they'll show up next time you deploy. So it's not quite worth fighting that fight just yet. Now, there's another one that maybe it's one of my little personal pet peeve that I've had to do even with Compliance Editor, is for devices that are dropping in and out of compliances. So let me give you an example here. SSH. The CIS benchmarks mandate that SSH is disabled. Great. But you cannot disable SSH through a config profile, which means in this case, the remediation policy will go and just run a command to turn off SSH every time we go through remediation. That's great. But most of our users actually have local admin. So what they could do is right after the remediation turns SSH off, they could go in terminal and turn it back on themselves. And, well, the remediation policy is scheduled to run once every day. So if they actually know what they're doing, they could basically have SSH turning back on every day and keep using SSH like we don't even try to restrict it. And it's not great. So what I've done is actually through Splunk and through those logs, I've created some alerts, like if a device keeps dropping in and out on a daily basis, it's like, yeah, the user is actually actively fighting back against our benchmarks, and maybe we just need to go and have a nice conversation with them to say, hey, mate, I know what you're doing, can you please stop? Yep.
So, Martin, ultimately, what's your verdict? Should folks in the audience migrate or not?
I would say yes, 100%. It's surprisingly easy. Like, it's so much easier to maintain and collaborate because it's just there in the Jamf UI. Like, you no longer have to share a local file with your team because they need to open that in the Jamf Compliance Editor app. It's just so much easier. And as you saw, like, when a new OS comes out, it's 3 clicks and you're just there. So yeah, I would say 100% go for it. I'd even go one step further. If anyone out here has never looked at any compliance benchmarks whatsoever, forget about all the other solutions and just start here, because it's very likely going to tick most of the boxes you need to worry about.
Nice. So I'll add here as well, broken record that I am, all you need to do is configure Jamf account SSO with either Jamf ID or your identity provider, Entra, Okta, whoever may be. So that's my bit.
There you go. And that's us. Thanks very much for attending. That's our details. That's the QR code of any links we've had in the presentation. And we are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, if there's any questions, I see, oh, awesome, I see some arms popping up. Some are also holding up phones.
My way.
Yep.
Right behind you,
We've got a mic coming right down to you.
On the benchmarking here, or rather on the compliance editor, can you have it like mostly enabled, but have a rule or two that's still in monitor mode, or is it all or nothing?
No, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got another gent over here.
So I know that there's compliance rules, like with SSH, you can set a login message. How does that work with the new compliance framework, so that you set it to be something more for your company rather than something generic?
Yeah, look, I would say if your company would like to have that sort of customization piece, that would be additional to what the baseline that you've customized contains, but you can certainly amend that, I suppose, with another layer if you need be. Yeah.
So would it be part of that framework, or would it be separate?
It would be separate. So yeah, really thinking about compliance benchmarks is a sort of definition created by mSCP, and then I work with my security team to say, you know, this is important to us and this isn't, but we're turning off rules that are defined by that benchmark. So if you would like to sort of add something further to it, like that login message for SSH, then that's something you can amend on top of it.
Just a quick clarification on that last question about monitor and enforce. You can do that by creating two separate rules, one that's enforcing these particular rules, and then create a second integration that's just monitoring the ones that you want to monitor.
Oh, yeah, good call. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks, Marcus. One arm over here. I mean, he's a whole person, not just an arm, but you know, yeah.
You mentioned some of your previous overlap with existing configuration profiles prior to implementing the benchmarks. Can you speak to how you sort of did the analysis of what was overlapping and what to get rid of versus what to keep?
Well, actually, everything was overlapping, because you're talking about the initial setup with the compliance editor or the migration with compliance benchmark?
Sorry. The initial setup. So going from having not implemented any of the benchmarks whatsoever to implementing them.
Right. Yeah, well, for example, things like software updates or, well, really any of them. So I had to go through any of my pre-existing config profiles, look for any conflicts, which sounds like the AI assistant might be a good option to do that now. But yeah, honestly, I did it manually and basically removed anything that the CIS benchmark would cover to just stick with whatever didn't like the beta software update or for example, the non-admin software update of it, things like that. But it was a manual process. Thankfully, you only really have to do it once.
So I turned one on yesterday, and out of 5 computers, only one's reported in, and I went and looked at the logs, and it shows that it's running on the other computers, but it's not reporting.
Okay.
Open a ticket.
Is it
sure. Did you look at are you in monitoring only, or are you enforcing?
We're in monitoring only, yes.
So have you looked at the logs of the audit policy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it shows a whole bunch of output, did this, did that, did this, check that, but it's not reporting on the rule report.
In the rules, okay. That one's for you, mate.
One of them's 26.1, the other one's 15.7.1 until this morning. Now it's 15.7.2, but.
Right, and the device is checking in, I mean, doing its inventory updates as expected.
Yeah, I just flushed the rules, see what it'll do after I removed a couple things, see if it'll do something.
I might have a come chat to you afterwards. I don't want to jump too quickly, but like,
I mean, I'll be honest, the troubleshooting when something is failing, it is a bit of a black box right now, and it can be tricky to figure out. what? Because those policies, they're quite extensive. Like those scripts are quite long and there's a lot of output. So what I've done so far to try to at least start with the easy bits is just make sure to push the profile again. Because sometimes a config profile might not go through, so either redeploying the whole benchmark or just unscoping and rescoping it, just to make sure that it is indeed the latest version of that profile that's out. But yeah, that can get tricky.
And that's not a behavior I expect, so happy to come and look at that together.
Hi, you mentioned, of course, being careful with the FileVault portion, personal recovery keys and all that. Do you have a recommendation on, because if you enable and enforce, I would assume it's going to create a new config profile to enforce FileVault, and probably don't want to just go and have to delete that every time to use your existing one. Would you recommend just using the new one and then making sure you're like re-escrowing the key into the device, make sure you don't run into any PRK issues there, or what do you think?
So if I'm not mistaken, the CIS benchmark actually only says that FileVault cannot be turned off. And that's the only thing they're looking at. What's tricky is once you're doing your migration and you might be deleting your old config profiles to avoid that overlap, maybe just don't touch your FileVault one with your recovery key and all that. So it really depends. If your FileVault profile might be a whole big profile with all those payloads, maybe that's going to be trickier. But unfortunately for us, we already had all that split in different payloads. So we could leave the enforce FileVault on one hand and the make sure, I think it's FDE enabled false or whatever the key is, like that could be a separate profile and not actually tick the box for the benchmark.
Okay, so if you already have a separate built-out just FileVault key configuration profile, you can just leave that and it won't cause any issues with the enforcement.
That's usually how I like to do with FileVault is do not touch it unless you have to.
Oh, I totally agree, which is why I was like, do I have to touch it or can I leave it alone?
No, you should be fine leaving it alone.
Great. Thank you.
Good thing to check, though.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? I don't think I see any other hands. All right.
Cool. I think we're done.
Yeah, thanks so much, folks. Really appreciate job done. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. All right.